Hello, welcome to our circle. Welcome to this sacred grove, this clearing in the forest. There are a few books, but mainly there are trees around us. And perhaps you'd like to pull up a chair or a log or sit on the ground, it's dry. And do introduce yourself. Say where you're from. Just as you would if you'd arrived in a forest clearing and other people were arriving and you were curious to know where they were from. And there's Rene from Hanover and Rick from, I don't know how you pronounce that, Tempe in Arizona, and Saskatchewan again, and Kaiserslautern in Germany, fantastic. Staten Island, Wisconsin. So that's lovely that in our virtual grove we're gathering from all around the world, from Portugal and Sydney and Oklahoma and the Netherlands, and just down the road in Seaford and East Sussex, and fantastic. Iceland. It's so lovely to have friends from Iceland gathering, and England has been a bit like Iceland in these last few weeks, but the snow has melted now, and spring is on its way. We'll see, but I think it is. And little hearts fly across the screen. That's very sweet. Thank you for that. And ooh, and thumbs and hearts. I hope you have a cup of tea. And let me start by asking you whether you listened to the Alanis Morissette song that I posted up last week. It was at the bottom of the blog post, so you may not have got to it. But if you did, could you just say yes, or just type in why, just so I know. And while you do that, I'll just recapitulate it for those of you who didn't listen to it. But in the film Sensitive, Alanis Morissette explained how she felt very sensitive, and how at the height of her career, when she was under quite a lot of stress and the house was full of people, she got into a cupboard, I think, and said a kind of, which was an affirmation that she would affirm her ultimate goodness, her innate goodness, and it starts off that I would be good, that I would love myself, essentially, whatever happened, whether she lost her hair, became ill, got old, failed, messed up, she would still love herself. And Helen Foreman is saying, yes, it was lovely, and it is a song that is sung in a way like a heartfelt prayer. And Elizabeth, who was with us last week, wrote into me this morning and said, the Alanis Morissette song touched my heart. Thank you. I like to meditate to this. It has a lovely healing energy and is good for soothing the inner child. The Afagthi. Now, Afagthi, which is spelt, is Welsh name, spelt Afagdw, but it's pronounced Afagthi. Is the incredibly ugly child that the goddess Ceridwen gives birth to, which precipitates her search for Arwen, for the elixir, because she figures, if I can't have a child who is beautiful, or who at least looks reasonable, so is accepted in the world, at least he can have Arwen and he can be a wonderful, inspired poet. And so she goes off in search of the Arwen. And in the course, in the training of the order, there's a particular point in the training quite early on, where it's actually Gwers 10, I think, the Bardic grade, and which is an interesting point for many people. We've had various meetings here precisely just about this one Gwers, because it's the point at which some people drop out of the course. They actually find it quite difficult. They rationalize it, I think, as it becoming psychological, and they felt that they didn't want to enroll on something that was had a psychological slant. But I think If that was the reaction, that would be missing the point, because I think psychology is vital and needs to go hand in hand with spirituality. What we suggest is simply that you have a conversation with this inner character, which in the story is depicted as a fagthy. It's that part of oneself that is the wounded child, to use psychological language. And somebody's saying, Xavi, I started a huge thread when I hit GWES 10. It has been such a great discussion. Absolutely. I think if you can really stay with it and trust the process, you gain a huge amount. Ceridwen basically had two children. One was a pretty girl, one was an ugly boy. And we suggest, you talk to both of them. And this is an exercise that you can do, whereas you can try actually talking to the difficult parts of yourself. And this brings us to the subject of the inner bard, which I thought would be interesting for us to explore this evening. In the last session, I talked about the idea of conversation and of how the New England transcendentalists were very keen on it, and how I think the idea of conversation is a really powerful tool one can use in the spiritual path. And this is how I see these events every Monday evening, is a conversation between us. And conversation doesn't only occur interpersonally with other people, it occurs intrapersonally, i.e. internally as well. And you may be familiar with those little conversations you have inside yourself, which in the most extreme polarize into, the angel and the devil sitting on either shoulder. There's a wonderful example of that in the dialogues that Gollum has in The Lord of the Rings. In the blog post that I'm going to put up for this, I popped in that clip where Gollum has a conversation with these two sides of himself, the nice Gollum and the nasty Gollum. And we all have that, hopefully to a much lesser extent than Gollum. But we have conversations, and in psychology, it can be referred to as self-talk. It's where we talk to ourselves. And it's this self-talk or conversation. You remember last week, perhaps, I quoted somebody talking about the New England transcendentalists, talking about how conversation acts as a midwife. It's a fantastic idea that conversation midwifes new ideas, feelings, experiences between us and within us, and so on. So we can apply the same approach to our internal conversations, that actually those conversations can midwife the rebirth of the self, or the development of the self. And I think I've laid it out in a bit more detail in my blog, but post which I put up. But basically, you can trace a kind of sequence that you can follow. The first step of which is simply becoming aware of the conversations. I think Pat Booker says, I know I have a whole parliament in my head. I think everybody is aware of these conversations one has in one's head. But the first step is to become aware of them, and then to articulate those voices that one represses, denies, or ignores. The annoying voices, the difficult voices that you don't really pay attention to. And so journaling and writing these down can be a huge help. First step, rendering what is partly conscious, semi-conscious, resisted or repressed, rendering them conscious. And just listening to them. I like to sort of sometimes imagine those voices as scruffy little kids that I invite into the grove, and I give them hot chocolate and biscuits and listen to them, give them attention. And then you can start to make a selection. You can start to say, these are the voices that I'm really going to pay attention to. And what neuroscience tells us is that, rather simplistically, but correctly, what the neurons that fire together wire together. So it's this extraordinary business of habitual thought creating actual pathways in the brain. I mean, that's a fantastic thought. So that we can create pathways in our brain by what we think. So the obvious thing to do is to identify the various paths through our personal forest, and then choose to perhaps allow those negative pathways to get overgrown, not to walk them so often, but to walk on those pathways that lead to interesting places, to creative, wonderful places. And in that way, we reinforce those pathways, and it becomes easier. And I think I can see, you know what I do on these things is I try to resist reading the comments because it's just so interesting. It's finding which wolf in your head you want to feed, says Katie. That's a fantastic idea. Now, and if you look at some behavioral psychology, they suggest shooting some of the wolves, you know, various ways of kind of repressing one voice and favoring another voice and so on. I think a slightly different approach, I think the bardic approach is much better, which is to recognize that we're all storytellers and we always have an audience, even if that audience is just one person, yourself. You are a storyteller, you do have an audience, and the storyteller is having an effect. There's an acronym which I discovered today that some psychologists use, which is T. I hadn't realized that T with Philip actually was more meaningful than I had thought. T, thoughts, E, emotions, A, actions. So what you think affects your emotions, which affects how you act in the world. So if we realize that the stories we tell us affect how we feel and affect how we act in the world, the bard within us starts to wake up from being kind of half awake and rambling on and telling stories without paying so much attention. Suddenly, the bard has woken up, listens to the various characters that are at his or her disposal, and can choose to write rather interesting stories. And this is where you get into this interesting question of owning your story, then choosing to get off certain scripts, and to create new scripts. It's very exciting, very creative work. Nikki is saying, yes, that's lovely. I can choose to edit the story. Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you one. It's kind of a trivial example, but it's a real example from my life, which is I had a little script in my head that I thought was so trivial, and took a rather silly sort of pride really in it, which was just, and it was just a one sentence story that went like this: I don't like shopping. I hate shopping. So whenever I went to the shops with Stephanie or with friends, I would be running that script. I would say, oh God, how boring. You know, I could be reading an interesting book, watching an interesting film, and instead I'm stuck here in the supermarket or in a department store. And I ran that script for 50 years or more, until Stephanie pulled the most amazing stunt on me, or that's unfair, said something really interesting to me. She said, I've been doing the shopping, the household shopping for the last 25 years. Now it's your turn. And suddenly I was faced at the beginning of last year with going shopping every week to the supermarket, something I hated doing. So I tried changing the script. I would walk into the supermarket and say, I love shopping. And I would exaggerate the word love. I'd say, I love shopping. And guess what? I really enjoyed the experience. I really loved shopping. So one can do that, I think. Not in every case, but try it. It's fun to play with that. And so when we sit here in our grove, we have this creative power, in this creative capacity. And what I love about the latest findings of neuroscience is the way that it simply confirms, or they simply confirm, what spiritual science, if you like, or the esoteric arts have been telling us for hundreds and hundreds of years, which is that thoughts are creative. T, thoughts affect emotions, affect action, and change our destiny. And so this is why these meditations that we do aren't just pleasant. They are pleasant, hopefully. They aren't just relaxing, even though they are hopefully relaxing. They are also creative. So let's be creative now by just taking a little time to open to the wonder of the fact that wherever we are, we're all united together at this time in sacred space. And it might help if you close your eyes, but you don't have to. You can do the meditation now. If you prefer, you can just listen and do this, play this again later and do the meditation later. But let's just become aware of being seated in the sacred grove, with the good earth beneath us, the trees around us, and the sky above us. And we sense the earth beneath us, and we sense the power of the earth, the energy of the earth, the strong, stable feeling of the earth. Just allowing our tensions just to drift into the earth, and feeling the healing energy of the earth flowing up into our bodies, into our auras, into our energy field. And then we breathe in deeply, breathing in the energy of the sky. And the energy of the sky meets the energy of the earth within the center of your being. And you sense the trees around you now. You feel them rooted deep in the earth, stretching high up into the sky. And you breathe in the scent of the trees, the breath of the trees. And you breathe in the essential oils that the trees are exhaling. And you feel them flowing into your being, bringing you health and healing. And then you allow the eyes of your psyche, your inner eyes, to open gently. And you see a small fire burning in the center of the grove. And you see that just to the side of you, there's a little path leading from the grove. And you sense an invitation to follow this path. You have a sense that it's not very long, it's not very far. And if it feels right for you, you just find yourself turning and just walking along the path. You can feel the soft forest floor. You can feel the atmosphere of the trees. Even sensing the spirit of the forest. And you walk along this little path, and you can see not far off that the trees fade away, and there's some rock and a little pool of water being fed by a spring. And you can see the moon or starlight in the water, reflected on the water's surface. And as you approach this spring, you sense the spirit of this spring. And you ask for their blessings. And if it feels right, you just dip your hand into the water. And you lift some of the water up and just touch your brow with this water. You can feel its cool, healing energy flowing into you. And you might even feel drawn to taking a sip of water and feeling that water flowing down into your being. And you give thanks to the spirit of the spring. And you touch gently with your hand the rock by the side of the spring, in love and in thanks for the blessings you've received. And then you turn around and walk back along the forest path. You can sense the atmosphere in the forest. You sense the presence of the trees as you follow the path back to the sacred grove. And you find your place in the sacred grove. And you sense your companions seated around you now in the circle. The small fire burning in the center of the grove. The smell of wood smoke. The presence of the trees around you and the spirits of the trees. And you close your inner eyes, the eyes of your psyche. You sense the support of the grove, the stability of the earth beneath you, the energy of the sky above you flowing into you, meeting the energy of the earth within the center of your being. And you take in a deep breath and feeling fully alive, filled with energy, you allow your awareness of the sacred grove to fade as you become aware of being seated in front of your computer. And you open your physical eyes to find yourself seated here and now, fully present. So, it's so nice to just sit with everybody. I could quite happily sit in silence, but that would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if we all sat in silence? Maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. But Shane Saylor is saying, Philip, do you have a favorite book on meditation for beginners? Gosh, you know, Shane, all the books I've read have bits that I love. You know, I really need some scissors and glue to paste it all together, but I'm thinking of doing an online course exploring meditation, really working with the idea that meditation isn't one thing. We tend to think that meditation is one thing, but of course it's many different things, and there are many ways you can meditate. And I thought it might be fun to do an online course where we all take a journey together and try one kind of meditation for, say, 1 or 2 weeks, and kind of check in with each other, say how we're doing, and then for another 2 weeks, do another kind of meditation. And, you know, I could give some background on it and suggestions for doing it and so on. And then we could check in with each other to keep ourselves on track. And then over, you know, a couple of months, perhaps we would have explored a whole range of different meditations with the idea that one of those we'll settle on one practice that we just love, that works for us at the time. Lovely, is saying Sammy. Oh yes, says Zavi. Merci. Yes, so let's do that sometime. So it's been lovely to see you. I'm going to enjoy reading your comments. I will go and refill this cup and put this video up on YouTube and on my blog. And in the blog, I've talked about this whole question of self-talk and the inner bard in a different way. And I've expressed that in the blog, and I've included that little clip of Gollum having a conversation, which for your enjoyment. So lots of love. See you again next week, I hope, and I'll look at your comments in half an hour or so, and then in a few days' time. So if any ideas come to you, I'd love to hear them. This is a conversation. I know I've got the microphone and you haven't, but you have got the keyboards. We are having a conversation. So I'd love to hear from you, and see you again next week, hopefully. Okay, bye.